We ready? I think we have a quorum. In the spirit of football season and coaches' corners, you know, they always set up their sponsor, their Coke. So Nestle is sponsoring today's meeting. Nestle water. Anyway. Okay. Welcome everybody to the Tuesday, November 14th Transportation Policy Body Meeting. Thank you all for coming again. Before you, we have the agenda. Do we have any new people here? Any new introductions? No, we're good. Okay, so we'll move on to the regular business. First item is to approve the approval of today's agenda, and I think we have a couple of additions. I mean, floor recognizes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the city of Keachai has approved the signing of an agreement between WAMPO and the city of Keachai for planning walkable places program. I do not have a copy of that at this time, but we would ask the chair to consider adding that to the agenda for approval.
Hayesville, Garden Plain, and Goddard have submitted theirs, and so we want to add that to the agenda. It's item number. Copies have been distributed in front of your desk. There's 3 sets in front of your deal, and that's the DI, item D, consent agenda, item I. So we have a motion from Bob and along with Hayesville, Garden Plain, and Goddard to be added to DI. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Claire. Any discussion? Okay, being none, all in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? None. The motion carries. Next item is the approval of the October 10th minutes. If you've had a chance to review them, any?
Approve the minutes.
Okay, Claire, thank you. Thank you. It's been a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Being no discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries. Next is the director's report. Mr. Nelson.
Just a brief reminder that the membership dues will be due for payment on January 31st of 2018. And also to ask Chris Upchurch to give you a brief update on the ozone.
Thank you. Chris Upchurch, WAMPO staff. Just here to talk to you very briefly about the 2017 ozone season. We had another very good year this year. You can see the 3 detectors we have in the Wichita region there, and all of them had values in the 63 to 65 parts per billion range. This is a very slight uptick from last year when they were in the 62 to 64 range, but still quite good. And in fact, this is the 3rd good year in a row. So our 3-year average is now down in the 62, 63 parts per billion range. And that 3-year average is what gets compared to the standard, which is 70 parts per billion. So you can see we're under it by a good bit there. So we're doing pretty well. We've had several years in a row now of very good performance. You know, staff will continue to monitor. I'll probably be back here in November of 2018 to talk to you about next year's ozone season. But our next big milestone on this track is probably going to be 2020. That's when the EPA is due to do their every 5-year review of what the standard is. So we'll probably have more to worry about then than we will between now and then. But staff will continue to monitor and update on this as it goes along. Any questions?
Yeah, remind the policy body. So are these done daily, weekly, monthly?
They're done daily, and
Okay.
then the number that you see there, actually the number you see there is the 4th highest day of the entire year. So we essentially get 3 gimmies, and then whatever day number 4 is the number that they actually rate us on. And then they'll take that 3-year average and compare it to the standard. So we're doing quite well at the moment.
Richard?
I think I want to clarify, it's done daily over a certain time span, I think through April through October. It's not year-round,
Yeah, I
and
believe they changed it so we're doing it in March through October, but yes.
something like this, so it's not year-round, and I could do a whole presentation on this, but, of course, the highest, it's per 8-hour, highest 8-hour period in part of a day. Okay, so the nights don't count when it's very low. I calculated it up, and like you said, it's the fourth highest day, so to go overboard, you have to have 4 days. That means 4 8-hour periods in 365 days, which is like 0.73% bad, and then that means you're 99 point something good, and you're all of a sudden bad. But that's how the federal government works. So I would argue we don't have a hair quality problem. We have a regulation problem. But that's, I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
No, I
If your
know.
kid got a 99.37% on his test, you'd be saying, well, you're in compliance, son. But not if your dad is a federal government, I guess.
Well, that's helpful. I couldn't remember how the measurements, so there's a window during the day, window of months during the year, during the daytime day.
Right, because actually, the heat is what makes it worse.
Right.
So, I mean, if
Yep,
you could
right.
regulate us, or you could regulate the weather, I guess, and outlaw high temperatures.
Sure. So I had a question, Chris. For those who don't know, if we do go over the 70, what implication does that have on us?
Well, the implication for WAMPO directly is we have to essentially start doing ozone modeling and project out into the future what our ozone levels are going to be based on projected future transportation demand and changes in the vehicle fleet and that sort of thing. So there is a bunch of in-house work for WAMPO, and it could potentially require us to change some of our future transportation plans going forward in terms of what we can build, because they want you to stay under the limit. There's also a much broader array of effects that where they're regulating other types of sources potentially. WAMPO is concerned with on-road mobile source emissions, essentially what's coming out of people's tailpipes. But then there are also other elements of the regulations that would affect, smokestack emissions and emissions from dry cleaners and gas stations and that sort of thing. But that's a little outside of WAMPO's bailiwick, but it would affect the region and its economy more broadly.
Okay. Well, thanks for the information.
Second. Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kristen Zimmerman, Senior Planner here on staff and also the TIP Coordinator. Our TIP, our Transportation Improvement Program, is due for an update next year in 2018. As many of you know, each time that we update the TIP document, we also carry out a process to award WAMPO funding to important transportation projects in our region. We do this every 2 years, and I bet many of you probably remember the last time we did this back in 2016. So during this presentation, I'll be reviewing some of the TIP basics, and I'll also be sharing some of your WAMPO staff's preliminary thoughts on how the process would work this year for your consideration. We've also briefed your TAC on this at their last meeting, so if you've had a chance to talk to your community's TAC member, you might already be aware of some of these ideas for the next cycle. So before we dive into our thoughts for this, the process for this next funding cycle, I wanted to go over just a few of the TIP basics. So the first is that the TIP is an ongoing WAMPO program. It's not a project that has a start and a stop. It's ongoing. We update it every 2 years, and we amend it on approximately a quarterly basis. This board, the TPB, is charged with voting on each update and each amendment. You probably remember seeing TIP amendments on your TPB agenda fairly frequently. Anytime a project is proposed to be added to the TIP or proposed to be removed from the TIP or proposed major change to the scope or the cost, we bring that to you as part of an amendment, and you vote to approve or reject those changes. So secondly, the TIP is one of the 4 core planning processes that WAMPO, along with all the other MPOs in the country, are federally required to carry out. A third, at the heart of the TIP process is that's really intended to be used for the region to carry out a rational process to choose which specific highway, road, transit, bicycle, pedestrian, or any other type of transportation project or program from the region's long-range plan, in our case Move 2040, that needs to be done in the short term. And then lastly, the TIP programs or awards funding to those projects that are selected. So since this third bullet is really the heart of the TIP process, I wanted to review it in just a little bit more detail. So the TIP really starts with the long-range plan, or which in our case is the Move 2040 document. It's our region's current long-range transportation plan. This board adopted it back in the summer of 2015, and it included projects planned for the years 2015 through 2040. It also included tentative funding sources for those projects, whether it be federal source, a state source, or a local government source. And it also called out which of those projects would be candidates for WAMPO funding in the future. So you might be asking, well, what happened to those projects? Well, some of them were in the TIP that was the current TIP that was in place when Move 2040 was adopted. We called that the 2015 TIP. It included projects with committed funding for 2015, 16, 17, and 18. Then when we updated the TIP back in 2016, we moved forward the projects that were already in the TIP for 17 and 18, and we went through a process to award funding for the years 19 and 20. And so now we're starting to talk about the next TIP, the 2019 TIP, and again, we're proposing to roll forward the projects that are already in the TIP for 19 and 20 and focus on awarding funding and including projects for the years 21 and 22. And then, of course, some of the projects that were in Move 2040 are still in Move 2040, and they weren't selected to move forward into a TIP. And then, of course, the cycle starts all over again with the next MTP, which gets updated every 5 years. So because the long-range plan is updated every 5 years and can be amended as needed, this overall process is intended to provide both flexibility for changing priorities and changing politics in the region. And it's also intended to provide some stability to both the entity that's sponsoring the project as well as to the general public. So for example, the engineering, budgeting, and public input process to do a project to, let's say, reconstruct an intersection or reconstruct a section of an arterial can take 3 to 4 years, from preliminary engineering through the city's budgeting process, through construction. And some of the larger projects that KDOT does in our region, for example, the current I-235 and Kellogg interchange project, can take a decade or longer. So it is very important that we provide some sense of stability in this process. And really my main point here is that the long-range planning development process is really the time when the tough decisions are made. That's when the decisions are made in terms of which projects would be candidates for public funding, public tax dollars to be spent on. And the TIP really functions more as kind of a shortlisting process to move projects from the long-range plan into to commit funding for the short term. Okay, so back to the TIP. The result of each TIP update cycle that we do every 2 years, we develop a large document our staff puts together. It's usually about 100 pages. We've got maps, graphs, charts. It documents the process that was used to put together to include the projects that were proposed for WAMPO funding and also other kinds of funding. And it also includes all of the federally required provisions for TIP documents. So that said, we know that most of us, aside from maybe our federal regulators, are most interested in the project list that results from these update processes. So I thought we would just check it out here. We've been really excited about this new software, this new tracker. It includes the details of all the projects that are currently in the TIP. And we hope that you've all had a chance to check it out and had a chance to share it with your staff and constituents. Is that big enough? So as I scroll through these, you'll see that the TIP, because the federal regulations call for the TIP to include all the transportation projects in our region that are federally funded or regionally significant. It includes WAMPO-funded projects. So, for example, let me pick one out here. The 37th Street Oliver to Woodlawn is a WAMPO-funded project. It also includes projects that are managed by or awarded by other entities. For example, KDOT. KDOT does a lot of work in our region with federal money. All of their projects are included in here. And also Wichita Transit. I'll scroll down a little further here. So again, it includes all projects that are federally funded or regionally significant that are taking place in our region, regardless of the managing entity or the funding entity. And in fact, federal regulations call for all these projects to be included in the TIP before money can be, funds can be available for the project, again, regardless of the managing or awarding entity. Let me get back to the presentation. Is that right? Okay. So what are some of our thoughts for this new TIP for next year, the 2019 TIP? Well, there's two major components to each TIP update cycle. The first is federally required provisions. There's several provisions. I want to assure you that your staff will make sure that we address these adequately. I did want to bring to your attention one new provision that we'll have to do on this TIP that we haven't had to do before, and that has to do with reporting on the region's progress to meeting our performance targets. So you probably recall that my colleague Chris Upchurch has been presenting to you for the past several meetings on setting and adopting targets for these performance measures. It has to do with things like bridge condition, congestion and delay for all travelers and specifically for freight traffic, for transit vehicle conditions, safety, things like that. So this new TIP will need to include a section where we're reporting and documenting on how well the region is doing in meeting those targets that we've adopted for ourselves in all these different areas. We'll also make sure to reach out to our partners at KDOT and also Wichita Transit to ask them to submit to us all of their federally funded projects so we can make sure we have a comprehensive list. And then, of course, the second major component for each TIP update cycle has to do with the WAMPO-funded project selection. So let's focus our attention on that. We know that this is an important topic for many of you in the room. So today I'd like to review just some of the major aspects and principles that our staff has been thinking about for this update and go into a little bit of detail. Like I mentioned before, we have briefed the TAC on this already on some of the in the weeds details, and I will be back at a future meeting for you to take action on all this. The purpose today is just to give you a heads up that we've started thinking about this and it's going to take place next year. So our initial thoughts on how to do this is that we would like to essentially build off of and use essentially the same process that we used last time around back in 2016. It's our intent that we can bring some stability to this process for you, for our decision makers, and also for our applicants. And that said, in the interest of continually improving processes, we would like to tweak the process a little bit. We'd like to make some tweaks based on the lessons learned last time around, and we'd also like to make some tweaks in order to test out some new features that we might want to try for the next long-range plan project selection process. So to give you a sense of what I'm talking about in terms of tweaks for in response to lessons we learned last time around, one example is that one of the measures in the selection criteria has to do with safety. Well, after we went through the process of ranking all the projects, every project ended up having the same safety ranking. Well, we know that projects are very different in terms of the safety benefits that they would bring to our region. So we want to tweak the way that we assess the safety benefits so that not all the projects end up with the same score. Those sorts of tweaks we want to do from what we learned last time around. And then in terms of, to give you a sense of what I'm talking about for tweaks for what we'd like to test, it really has to do in kind of a couple areas. One, we'd like to start incorporating some aspects of how well the proposed projects address some of the trends that you guys have been talking about. I know you talked about it at your retreat, and also we've had some speakers over the last year. How well are these projects responding to and addressing some of the demographic, economic trends that we're seeing here in our region? We'd like to have a more involved public participation component to this tip. Last time, I think we asked for public comment at the very end of the process on the document. So we'd like to work in ways that we can get public comment earlier and bring that to you for your decision making and your consideration in that process. So those are the sorts of things we're talking about in terms of tweaks. So essentially the same process with hopefully some improvements to make it smoother. So what would this process be? Well, you'll see there's a calendar on the bottom of your screen. That's for next year, for 2018. We'll start out with soliciting projects early in the year. This is kind of a call for projects time, the official time when we're asking for folks to officially let us know they'd like to submit their project for consideration for WAMPO funding. I did want to let you know our staff has already started reaching out to those project sponsors who have eligible projects. And as of now, it looks like from these initial calls, we'll have approximately $40 million in demand, and we'll probably have about half of that to award. So that's where we're standing on in the numbers right now. Next would be a process where we do some staff screening. This would be pretty rote stuff, making sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. We'll be making sure the applications are complete, making sure the scopes are clear, making sure the projects are eligible for the different sorts of federal funding programs, those sorts of things. Then, of course, we'll go through the project selection process. We'll have more detail on that on the next slide, so stay tuned. And then the last step would be, of course, final approval. A recommendation would be made to this body on the projects for WAMPO funding for 2021 and 2022, and that would come to you later this summer for final action. And again, throughout this time, we'd like to design a process to have some public input take place throughout the process, not just at the end. So let's focus on that project selection process. This process really is made up of two main components. The first is selection criteria, and the second is the selection committee. That's going to be the folks that are going through the process to rank all the projects. So like I mentioned again, we'd like to keep the same process, or at least the same, basically the same selection criteria. I did want to let everyone know I've got copies up here of the selection criteria we used before. So if you'd like to look at that at your leisure, feel free to grab me after the meeting. I'm glad to give you a copy. This is a called project selection criteria, and it's like a criteria that you might use to hire a new employee or select a consultant. In this case, we're using it to rank the proposed projects on certain criteria. So we've got 3 criteria. Again, these are the ones we used last time around for 2016. So the first one is, how consistent is the project with the Move 2040 investment strategy? It's obviously somewhat consistent because it's in the Move 2040 plan to begin with, but we like to go through and look at the project and evaluate how consistent is it, how well does it align with this strategy. As a reminder, the Move 2040 strategy was to preserve and maintain the existing condition and functionality of our system, to stabilize the transit service, to address system reliability, expand mode choices, and safety. So this has to do with looking at each project, asking how well does the project align with that strategy, and then the committee would give it a ranking of excellent, good, acceptable, or unacceptable. The second criteria or second question has to do with regional significance. How important is this project to the overall region as opposed to the individual municipality? Does this project meet an identified regional need? How important is it to the region? WAMPO's jurisdiction is the region, the regional system. So again, this is a process of asking this committee to assess that and again give a ranking of excellent, good, acceptable, or unacceptable for the project. And then the last set of criteria has to do with with the achievement of the Move 2040 goals. So Move 2040 laid out several goals for the region. They had to do with the choice and connectivity, economic vitality, freight movement, infrastructure condition, quality of life, safety, and system reliability of bottlenecks. So this has to do with going through each project and assessing how well the project advances those each individual goals. So for example, on the economic vitality, the question is how well does the project contribute to the vitality of our region? How well does it connect or enhance to a major employment center? Those sorts of things. And again, it would have a ranking of excellent, good, acceptable, unacceptable, or not applicable in all of those areas. And then, of course, and before I get to this new idea, I did want to add that you may have heard me mention that one of the goals of Move 2040 was infrastructure condition. It is a goal. I did want to clarify that I know this group has been discussing this asset management initiative, and I just wanted to say that the work of that initiative will have no effect on this process I'm talking about. This group has been talking about it. That initiative is just getting up and going, and it might have an effect on future project selection processes, but it won't play a role in this one. So just wanted to clarify that. And then this last bullet here has to do with, again, a new idea we're considering. And again, this has to do with kind of testing out some new approaches that we might want to use for the next long-range plan. And we might ask questions, for example, of how well do these projects address the trends that we've been talking about? How well does it address the changing demographics or some of the changing economic trends? Okay, and then the second component to the selection process is, of course, the selection committee. This will be the group of folks that are going through the projects and ranking them. Again, we're proposing that this would be a subset of TPB and TAC members. I believe last year we had a committee, or last time we did this, back in 2016, we had a committee of five people. That committee would make a recommendation for which projects would be moved forward for WAMPO funding. They would meet. They would review the applications. They would hear presentations from the applicants. They'd have a chance to ask questions of the applicants. They'd fill out the ranking matrix and ultimately make a decision, make a recommendation on which projects should be awarded funding, again, based on the amount of money that's we're projecting to be available for those years. Okay, I just sort of want to wrap up in closing here. Again, this is your WAMPO staff's initial thinking on the process for your consideration. We hope it's a good mix of stability and keeping with the process that our applicants and this board has been through already, while also making continual improvements by making some tweaks based on what we learned last time, and also kind of turning the ship a little bit to address some of these new trends that weren't on the horizon when Move 2040 was developed. We want to stay true to Move 2040 and also acknowledge some of these new trends. So we do, again, plan to bring back some more details to you at a future meeting. We want you to would ask you to take action on some of these things. And at this point, I'd be glad to take any questions you might have, or turn it back over to the chair for discussion among the board.
One thing, oh, we have sound now. Okay, we're maybe going to reboot the system. Anyway, thank you, Kristen. It's a good refresher for what the process is for all of us. I don't really have any questions. Anybody else got any questions or comments for Kristen? Okay.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a discussion about scenario planning, and Ms. Gloria Jeff is going to talk to us.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Gloria Jeff, Principal Planner for the Wichita Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. It's been an interesting time for us as we've moved through this new initiative. As part of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan development activities, we've started doing scenario planning. The policy body appointed an expansion of the implementation committee associated with Move 2040. And Keith Lawing, who is here in the audience, is serving as the chair of that organization. Other representatives include James Clendenin, who is not representing the city of Wichita, but is rather representing the Sedgwick County Association of Cities. Cindy Claycomb is representing Wichita State University, along with Dr. Samuel Brown, who is in charge of the Hugo Wall School. We have representatives from the Transportation Advisory Committee. We have a representative from Friends University. We also have representation from the Greater Wichita Partnership, from the freight community, and from the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. It is our intent to help this board visualize what could the future be. It is not an opportunity to pick a future, but rather to focus on what might the future be. And we're going to look at a variety of considerations around the level of economic activity, land use, and what are the trends currently telling us, whether or not we want to continue to be governed by those trends, or if we want to begin to make changes to create new trends for ourselves. There are sort of 6 basic pillars upon which scenario planning is built. It is looking at where are we now, what are the conditions now, what are the forces or the trends that are driving us toward the future, whether they are changes in demographics, whether it is changes in technology, whether it is looking at issues around equity, just what are the things that we are going to be using to shape our future. What do we need to do in the future? What is it that we want our future to look like? What are the impacts of these various futures? Because again, we're not going to pick one. We're going to look at an array of those possibilities. And then finally, as we look at the conditions that we want, how are we going to get there? And as I said, and I'm going to keep repeating, this is not an effort to pick the future. Planners like myself, we're really bad at that. When we pick a future, it's most likely not to happen. So we're not trying to pick the future. This gives us a chance to take a look at what could be and what do we want it to be. What could be is if we keep doing what we've always been doing, are we happy with that? Are there some things we'd like to have different? and what happens if we make those changes? And then finally, regardless of what we assume about the future, what things are going to happen anyway, and how do we plan for those with respect to our transportation system and the impact that our transportation system has? The policy body understands the concept of trends and driving forces, challenges, and issues. At your September the 12th workshop, you actually began that work as part of your efforts to identify a strategic initiative. You identified a series of things to be considered. We then took those and translated those into drivers, challenges, issues, opportunities, and items that you identified that we needed to consider from an equity standpoint. What we'd like to do today is have you take a look at those, and they are on the board behind me, and then say, have we captured everything that you thought was important? If we have not, what additional items do we need to add? And then I'm going to give you an excuse to get up and move, because I know how much you love sitting throughout these meetings. And we're going to place in front of you a total of 12 dots where you'll be able to identify 3 in each of the categories that we'll use to help prioritize. We're doing the same kind of activity with many of those folks who are impacted by the transportation system. Keith has been out and about doing a number of them, and those of you who were at the Sedgwick County Association of Cities meeting on the weekend had an opportunity as well, as we honored our vets. But again, we're going to ask you to tell us what's important, because based on what we get from you as well as others who are doing this exercise, we'll begin to build scenarios. We'll begin to identify what you think the future might be. Quick run through on what we've identified, and again, I'm going to pause at each one and ask you if there's anything you'd like to add. You identified sort of 3 critical areas as drivers. One was technology. You felt the advent of drones was important, driverless and connected vehicles. Information technology and how we utilize it and how it's changing was also important, and then the whole impact of that on supply chain and logistics. You also identified that when we look at the demographic, the fact that we have 5 generations, everything from the silent generation to those who will be born into a world in which the internet is commonplace, smartphones are old technology, and immediate news are givens. And that's a very different world from one many of us grew up in. Some of us are old enough like me to remember that you got your news a couple times a day. And if you were lucky, there was a radio station that did 24-hour news, but for the most part, you couldn't just pick up your phone and go, okay, what's happening right this second? Social media was not even thought about or even considered a possibility. That's no longer the case. So we have this wide range of individuals, how they use that information, and what their expectations are of the transportation system. You also talked about economics, and you recognize that there is a significant impact in terms of warehouse to the front door. Everything from, I remember when we used to be able to get 14-day shipping and handling and thought it was magnificent. Now, when I place my order on my phone, if it's not here within 24 hours, what's wrong? Why don't they have it to me? And some of the suppliers have relocated their distribution centers so that if you order it by 10 o'clock in the morning, you can get it by 5 o'clock that evening. That has a real impact on the transportation system. We used to depend on retail in brick and mortar locations to be the locations of purchase, and therefore we knew what the surrounding area was in terms of trip generation associated with that. Today, with the mobility of our personal digital devices, we can place an order anywhere to be delivered anywhere. This region has a unique economic impact of exporting our 18 to 54-year-olds. And that has an impact on the skill sets, the kind of workers we have, and the kind of revenue that gets generated for use by our member jurisdictions. Are there any other drivers that we did not pick up from your discussion that need to be included? Yes.
I have some questions. I'm looking through this backup material. We have this asset management survey tells us and has all the stuff there. Is this supposed to be, I mean, what role is this information here, and where did this information come from?
You are referencing the trends highlights, and that's simply a highlight of all of the trends that we became aware of. The asset management information is a result of a survey that we took among all of the member jurisdictions within WAMPO, asking them what do each of these jurisdictions know about the condition of their assets, and that's simply a summation of a couple of the high points from that. There's a more comprehensive document on our website.
Okay, so what role is this, so what's this gonna be used for?
That information will be used in terms of the scenario planning as simply one of the data points.
Okay, well, I'm looking at that, and it just has some things in here that I find doubtful, and I mean, it says the Generation X, which I'm a member of, says the walking is preferred mode of travel. It says millennials walking is a preferred mode of travel. I doubt either one of those are actually true if you look in our community.
It's a different survey.
It's a completely different survey. That's not part of the asset management survey.
That's a part of this thing here, this documentation.
Mr. Tabor?
I was just gonna say, this is not part of the asset management stuff that, anything that we've done with asset management is not part of this presentation at all. What you're
Well,
looking
it's
at
in here
is-
under, okay, so we're in scenario planning, right?
Yes.
This trends highlights, it's in the same section.
Well, there were several trends that have been presented to us over the last year by various groups, WSU as well as others, that highlighted things like what the demographics are. That's separate totally from the asset management stuff that we had put out a survey to our member jurisdictions for. It's just separate.
Okay.
Okay.
I understand that, but this is still, okay. Yeah, the first thing was asset management, but it says a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of other categories.
And we identified the source for them. So, for example, there was information from the Downtown Development Corporation. We identified that that was the source that it came from. Again, those were intended merely as an informational piece that we've been.
I guess is what I'm saying is I remember a lot of these presentations, some of which, I mean, we listened to them, some of them which were, I mean, they had assumptions and they said things. I mean, they were problematic. They had a certain point of view, but there was one by a physician there that was problematic. The AARP, I remember this presentation. It says that they're trying to say that for the elderly, safe and accessible sidewalks are important. I just see some things in here that I don't think reflect reality. And we're transportation. Okay, I understand. I think I know all the presentations are well planned out, and I feel like we're being pointed in a direction on some of these issues. I mean, just look around outside. People don't want to walk to work here. You know, I just, as we move forward, I'm just trying to point out, as we move forward and we make decisions based on some of these things that I don't believe are accurate, and I don't think we've seen the data to substantiate it, then we're going to divert important recesses from roads and bridges that we do need and are important. I think we need to be careful with that. I mean, does it,
Richard, I think what we're looking at in the global thing, the nature of the beast is shifting, and there are more people that don't want to drive, and it's starting to show up in the core areas of cities where people are moving.
I know you're being told that. I mean, the universities, the planning organization tell us that. Okay, I get that. But I don't think it reflects reality. Just look around outside. Go around and see how many Generation Xers are wanting to walk to work.
But that's
Is
right
not-
now.
And
We're
there's a
talking
small segment
long-term plans.
of millennials who might say that they want to. But I'm telling you, I mean,
I understand where
we
you're
got to
coming
deal with reality, and not the theoretical stuff that's coming out of some of these organizations that want to push us in a certain direction because it's bad to have cars. I get that, but this is Wichita, Kansas, and Sedgwick County. This isn't New York City where you have, millions of people scrunched in. It's just, we need to be very careful. I mean, we're the policy board. We staff can bring stuff to us, but we have to say, does this really reflect reality in the community that I live? And you got to be careful. If you ask somebody, they'll always say, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." But in reality, when they have to choose to walk to work,
There are
they're
more-
not going to do it.
There are more people in this area that would do that if it was available than are doing it. So,
We're also talking about the future.
yeah, we're talking long-term.
If you look at the MTP, you'll see almost every dollar is committed to roads, bridges, sidewalks, all of those things. But we're talking about the future, the 15 to 20 years from now is what we're talking about.
So there was a time when human beings had to walk everywhere. And by choice, they looked for better, more efficient modes of transportation. It might have been horses, it might have been wagons, but eventually it was cars and all this other stuff. Okay? Because it's easier, facilitate. That's not going to change. I'm sorry, we're being led down a path that just is, you think we're going to regress and people are going to stop driving, now they're going to start walking everywhere. That's not going to happen.
I think for maybe part of what you're saying, I mean, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but I think you're missing something in that the downtown part of Wichita has been redeveloped over the last several years. There's been several new apartment areas that went in. A lot of businesses have put themselves together and within walkable distance, and there absolutely are quite a few people that walk to work now in that area. I'm not saying that this data reflects percentage-wise of what has happened, but you can't just discount it and say that it's not when it is.
Well, certainly there have been some developments that are highly subsidized downtown to force that sort of thing to happen. You're correct.
But people wouldn't have moved in if they didn't want it. They
The-
wouldn't be walking to work if they didn't
That's
want
true, but it's a very small percentage, and you're talking about
I
a
don't
small
disagree with that, sure.
small area. You still have problems getting people downtown. I just read a story today about another business closing because there's not enough traffic there.
Commissioner, you've actually
I'm just saying,
made,
we need to have realistic expectations. This is our supporting data, and you're trying to say that Generation X is walking is the preferred mode of travel.
Commissioner, you've actually
not
made the case for scenario planning, which is rather than picking a single future, what we want to do is look at a variety of possibilities. And the one that you described where people continue to utilize their automobiles as their primary and exclusive mode of transportation, where people continue to live in low-density environments, where people continue to do exactly what they're doing now, is one of the potential scenarios. All we're trying to do is identify what are the forces and how do we consider those. It doesn't mean that we pick the future, but clearly one of the futures is the one that you've described, where nothing changes.
Well,
This is something
I
that's-
see all these statements here, which, in my estimation, don't reflect reality as an attempt to push us into picking a certain future. That's how some of these planning organizations and academics work. I mean, they're trying to lead us to believe something that simply isn't true.
What Gloria is trying to provide us today and get us to look at too is something that's come out of other meetings, and this is the top vote getters out of those meetings, correct?
These are the ones
It's
that
the
we
same thing we
received
did
from
in TAC
your
a couple
technical,
months ago.
your Transportation Advisory Committee has done this, but these particular ones, these are yours. The items you see here came out of your September the 12th, 2017 workshop.
I said,
The
this is
members
something
who
that's
were
brought
present
forward.
gave us this information.
Again, I just wanted to make a comment on these things here that are going to be used as we move forward, I think. If we make decisions based upon flawed data, then we make flawed decisions. That's all I'm saying. And we as policymakers have to be able to get through all the stuff we're being presented and be able to say, all right, listen, just when the time comes, we need to be able to say, no, I don't think that's reality. Okay, I mean, we got to be honest with ourselves. Otherwise, we only have certain resources, right? And you don't want to divert important resources away to things when we're talking about modes of transportation. I'm not talking about sidewalks for recreation or anything like that in the neighborhoods. Okay, but when you talk about modes of transportation here in Wichita and Sedgwick County, with the climate and development area the way we have, we just need to not overemphasize where it's going to be and to what degree so that we don't divert resources away, I think, as we move forward. And I'm concerned that's the direction that we might be heading for a
I
variety of
understand what
reasons.
you're saying, but we have to pay attention to what demographics out there are saying back to us too, so.
But I don't think, where does this Generation X that's from 19, you were born in 1965 to 1980. Show me the data that supports that. I mean, the data. I don't believe it. That's what I'm saying.
Based on this, I don't hear that there are any new drivers that we need to consider. So let's look at the challenges and issues. You identified the loss of 18 to 54-year-olds as an issue that we need to be concerned about, our slow growth with respect to both population and jobs, the need to have a more viable transit system was one of the issues that you felt we needed to address. There is a dichotomy that you wanted to address, which has to do with the availability of cheap land and cheap fuel that continues to support our expansion of where people live, work, and play in this metropolitan area beyond the limits of the existing infrastructure. One of the issues that you raised was this issue of who benefits and who pays. And then finally, this issue of thinking in time as a perspective in terms of just focusing on the right this second, but being able to look out over the 15 to 20-year time period that we are proposing to do. Are there any other issues or challenges that we need to consider beyond these? Or is this an adequate reflection of what this body thinks is important? Hearing none, then we'll go on to the opportunities. One of the things you were very clear about in your workshop was that community policy needs to drive technology use decisions. What the community sees as being important, what its policies are, will drive how technology gets used in that community. Drone technology is one that you felt was important because of the nature of the industrial clusters here. There was this issue of we have an opportunity to do greater population density, that we need to look at the expansion of how freight transportation is utilized and the capacity that we have, whether it's out at Eisenhower and the additional almost 375,000 operations that it can accommodate, to the fact that we are on the I-35 corridor between the two largest trading partners of the United States, which are Canada and Mexico, and that we need to create communities for seniors because we know from the demographic information, the folks who live in this area are retiring in this area. They're not moving to Florida. They're not moving to Arizona. They're not moving to Texas. They're staying right here. And so we need to think about what will the needs be of that retired population, and that we also need to have a greater understanding of non-auto, non-truck-based travel. Again, these are things that you said. Are there any other opportunities that we have not captured?
I could just ask a question. Obviously, I'm not one of the persons providing the actual input, but was automated connected vehicles discussed as part of the future scenario? Because I can tell you around the country that's rapidly happening, and metro MPO organizations are preparing to deal with that for their future plans.
This body listed it as one of the technology driving forces. Any other opportunities? And then finally, the issue of equity. The only thing you seem to have identified in the workshop was this issue of making sure that there was an equitable access to the advantages and opportunities that the technological advances would bring to this area. Are there any other issues of equity around either modal opportunities or modal investment, around the issue of population groups or special needs groups that you want to have expanded in this conversation?
Buddy?
All righty then. Now comes the fun part. At each of your places, you have a little sheet of dots. I'm going to ask you to identify your top priorities in each of the categories: drivers, challenges, issues, opportunities, and equity. by spending no more than 3 in any of the category. If you have one item that you want to use all 3 on, feel free to do that. The intent here is to give us some sense of your priorities. And are there any questions?
If we did this Saturday, do you want us to do it again?
Absolutely. You're in a different chair today. I saw another question.
So driving and drivers, there's only 3 choices.
You can spin 3 dots, but you can spin them all on the same one if you want.
Equity, there's only one.
Yeah,
But
because you didn't
did
identify.
we create those 4 categories and divide them out that way?
Yes, sir.
We did?
All staff did was take your work and put it in the boxes and make it look pretty.
We come up with the 4 categories themselves?
We provided those when we did the initial presentation to the body about how we were going to do scenario planning, and this body said, okay.
Yeah. Well, I guess I see a problem with the process. I mean, we have lots of things up there. We might have 3 of them. Well,
Richard, I think
this is part of the problem with how we do these sorts of things, that, I mean, it forces you into a certain direction, and like, there's only one over there, so we might assume that that's as important as, we might have 6 of them in the opportunities that are more important, but I guess,
we did the same thing in attack on a similar exercise, and we didn't have enough dots. There were several things on there I thought ought to get a dot on it, but I didn't have enough dots, so I had to pick which ones I thought were most important, and that's what she's trying to get us to do here.
It's a pretty common exercise done in order to focus us on more what, as a group, as a collective, we find to be the more important aspects of each of those. It's not like this was made up here. It is pretty common, and it usually has a pretty good outcome. I understand you have.
I've seen it used in a couple of other scenarios, and it gets what's intended, it gets at. I'm not so sure it's a good process, but nevertheless.
I will tell you that I had something that I threw out in the last exercise that I was doing this on, and I thought it was rather important, but there were some other things up there that were more important than my idea, and I had to vote for them. So I didn't even get to vote for my own idea. So that's the way it goes. So
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, if we could take about 10 minutes to let folks put their dots up.
take 2 dots.
Where's
We got
mine?
a bunch of dots here, we can just eat. Give them all to me.
What did the ladies in Bel Air do?
Good, how are you? Let's play with your dots.
Yeah, it's time for some color.
Yeah. You'll take care of it.
You're wrong. So challenges, issues, and red opportunities. Go ahead and make it purple. Because that's the way I know. I'm a big fan of thinking in time. Challenges and issues, what flows from the others. Find your way through. What's opportunities? Blue.
Right?
Are the annual meetings in DC now?
I guess we only have one of them, so there's not a lot of choice.
There's gonna be a neighbor across the street.
That sort of thing. Keep Goddard in line.
I could, my wife.
Well, I'm sorry. I think some of this is going to be short-lived.
You do some stuff there locally, right?
Sir?
I'm not even, I am saying I don't disagree with anything you know what I mean? That's a different, that's not exactly what you know, that's.
I express my philosophy even if it doesn't quite fit.
Okay, Tom, I'm about to. Just wait on this end, when you ready to go.
Yes. You're not, look at the Thursday paper.
I have participation in any of the sport.
No, usually,
And we wouldn't hear from
usually,
them.
right. Sports, especially when you get that kind of opposition, stick quiet. They don't want to attack. I haven't locally, I guess, when you say city limits, I got a few, but I'm not getting a big. Right outside of the city limits, we're getting larger. And again, we don't exactly.
Fords are gonna choose it. Western said you can, and some people need, so.
Could be south. Because there are some criteria that placing has identified as to what they want. Metropolitan area, rail.
There he is. Lost control.
See, that's that's out of contention.
Especially when it is far beyond. I mean,
Well, strategic planning.
Your dots.
Are we done?
No, come on.
Okay, that was.
He's got 80 people still. That's
Either, you're the only one that hadn't done it.
80 in our council.
Have to?
Prioritize based on the dot exercise chart up there.
Drivers, challenges. We're usually gonna get out in the newspaper, or it goes to sleep.
very good.
Your city.
Yes, we had three council positions, mine was one of them, and mayor, and all of us successfully beat none of the above.
Mr. Chairman, we're ready to go.
Okay.
We're on that ballot.
We're back. Everybody could come back and take a chair.
Quick summary of how your dot exercise went. Under drivers, technology was your first and top of the chart, followed very closely by demographics, followed by the economics. In the challenges and issues category, your top priority was the brain drain, as our friends at Wichita State like to talk about it, followed by slow growth, and then how to keep us thinking in time as a perspective under challenges and issues. Under opportunities, again, top of the chart is the expansion of our freight capacity, followed by community policy, driving technology, followed by the development of a greater understanding of the importance. And because we only had one choice in equity, those who voted for the one that was there. So this will be combined with the data that we've gotten from the business groups that we're going to talk to or have already talked to from the Greater Wichita Chamber, their Government Relations Committee, their Executive Committee, and others. Keith, you want to talk a little bit, because you've probably done 4 or 5 of these already, about what we've been hearing?
Good afternoon. Keith Lowen with Workforce Alliance, and as Gloria said, I'm helping to lead the work group on this. We are doing a similar exercise with a variety of different organizations who are impacted and have an interest in transit. As Gloria said, we went to the Wichita Regional Chamber. They have created an ad hoc transportation task force, met with them and groups of the Government Relations Committee, went to the Sedgwick County Association of Cities. We'll be doing presentations before Wichita Transit Advisory Board, the District Advisory Boards, a number of other stakeholder groups. And it's going to be a similar exercise with what we did here with you all. Trying to identify what we think are the drivers about what the future can look like about transportation investments. And I think, as Gloria emphasized, the exercise we're undertaking is not to force any choice, but to give you as policymakers some better insights as to what those potential trends are, what the impacts are, and what are the economic opportunities for us in South Central Kansas around transportation investment. So this will be a bit of a process. It's not clean and really smooth in a sense because, again, of all the public input we're trying to get and then put that together. But I think we got a good group on the work team looking at this, and I look forward to coming back to you sometime in 2018, probably second quarter of 2018 maybe, with some scenarios for you all to consider and have some discussion about. So again, pleased to have this opportunity. I'll answer any questions if anybody has any questions for me.
Questions? Being none? Okay, thank you, Keith. Welcome.
Just to wrap up, Mr. Chairman, we have what happens next. We're going to complete this outreach by the end of December so that we have an opportunity to get lots of public engagement. We hope to be able to share the results of just the outreach with those who we chatted with by the end of January, and that we will begin to develop scenarios. We've already started in terms of doing the sort of baseline, which is what is the condition right now, and working through some other ones that will come out of the input that we've gotten. And hopefully by the end of February, I'll be ready to present those potential scenarios to our working group, who will then have a month or so to work on it, and then they'll come back to you in the second quarter. And that's all I have. If there are any questions or comments, additional comments, please feel free. If not, at your places, you have a little flyer that says if you want us to come to your council, if you want us to come to your community, if you want us to speak before some group that you think would be important for us to get input from, please let us know. We're continuing to schedule through the end of December. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Gloria. All right. Moving on, we'll go to the Committee and Partnership status reports and updates. Executive Committee did not meet last month. We will be meeting in December, so I don't have anything from the Executive Committee to report. Tom, how about the TAC Chair?
I don't have anything to report. We worked on approving the next process of starting a TIP, the next phase, so that was it.
Mr. Tom Hine, how about,
Yes,
you guys building anything around here?
we're trying to stay out of your way. That's impossible. But no, I wanted to first talk about the Federal Highway Administration has declared this to be Traffic Incident Response Week to raise awareness of the dangers that emergency responders are exposed to and to remind drivers of their obligation to use caution when approaching a traffic accident. So this week we're looking at that and posting blogs, putting out news releases, and trying to get people just to think about that. Because so many emergency responders are either injured or killed on the job, and so we're just trying to make people a bit aware of that, give them room to do their work. In the Wichita metro area, over 1,000 emergency responders have received traffic incident management training. It includes police, fire, EMTs, 911, call takers, all kinds of tow truck operators. It's a program that promotes a shared understanding of how to do quick incident clearance on our highways and best practice safeguards for emergency responders and motorists who are either involved in those incidents or who are driving through those incidents. On Wichita highways between 2013 and 2015, when TIM training began yielding results, we saw a tremendous decrease in the number or in the time it takes for a traffic incident to clear from 150 minutes average to 34 minutes on our highways. So that's a pretty significant change in just 2 years after the training. As a follow-up activity, law enforcement agencies in the area, fire departments, EMTs, those tow operators, 911 people, and the Which Way Traffic Management Center staff and other first responders in the area meet bi-monthly to discuss recent traffic incidents on our highways and critique those clearance procedures that we see. The Which Way cameras are used to see those incidents and how our first responders are reacting to them, how they're setting up a scene, and how it's coming together. These agencies then take that back to their agency if they were involved in that scene and try to learn from the mistakes and try to compliment each other when we do things right. And of course, we hope everyone is aware of the benefits provided by the Whichway Traffic Management Center. That's part of this. And the website, whichway.org, you can view the cameras on Wichita's highways, look at the message boards that are up right now, see traffic flow, and of course, winter's coming, so we'll be able to see road conditions on that. That's whichway.org. And finally, I have good news on our local highway projects. The 2-year 5-bridge replacements on I-235 have been completed. Everything's open in that area in northwest Wichita, including 25th Street access to I-235 with a new bridge over I-235 that hopefully has enough clearance now that it won't be struck every other month as it was in the past. And we can be thankful at the I-235 and US 54 project, the eastbound US 54 ramp to West Street will open by Thanksgiving.
Well, fantastic.
That's the best news I've got. Well, it's a small step in a big project. We're still on target to finish in the summer of 2019.
Summer of 19. I got to take a tour on the 235 in Kellogg construction. Put my hat on and cabled up and walked around. Very impressive. But so you closed the intersection one time for a weekend, and apparently, according to we really didn't have any incidents. I checked with the police. We were kind of
in there.
It was all good.
Mostly it was good.
There's going to be
some drivers got a little impatient and decided to do some things that weren't legal. There were a few accidents or crashes. They maybe weren't accidents. We will unfortunately do that a number of times where we have to close that. That was, we swung 12 beams over the lanes of Kellogg in that weekend, and that was for the southbound 2-lane I-235 flyover bridge to eastbound US 54. That's a 2-laner, so that's a bigger bridge. But we have one coming up that's northbound I-235 to westbound US 54, and we'll need to do it all over again on a different weekend. So something to look forward to.
I appreciate it. I think your communication combined with whatever you're doing and the local is good advance notice, seems to be.
Thank you. It's painful, but at least if we know about it, maybe we can avoid it or know that those problems are ahead.
Well, the West Street opening will be fantastic for holidays, beginning of okay. All right. And Rick Baglin, please tell us about the federal government.
All of the federal government? That's a tall order. Well, first off, it's great to rejoin you all. It's been, I was just talking with Phil. It seems like forever. It's been crazy few months. Lots going on, but I'm preaching to the choir here. So anyway, lots of developments, and I wanted to echo what Tom was talking about with traffic incident management. It's a key focus for us this week, and a lot of activities are happening around the country, including in Washington with our Secretary, Lane Chow. So, we definitely would encourage if you all have events here, definitely would love to hear about it too. So that's a good thing. I'm trying to remember when the last time I was here. It was like been 3 months because lots been happening. I'll start with some personnel changes. I'm not sure if everyone is aware, but I know that FTA has a new Deputy Regional Administrator, Mark Bechtel, who is Director of their Program Development Office. He came on board about 6 weeks ago. So hopefully we'll have a chance to have Mark down here with myself or with Mokti. But I know that FTA's been going through some changes, but having that position filled, I think will really kind of help, and hopefully we'll see more FTA as we move along. In our office, John Knowles, who was at this meeting last time, he will be moving on. He's moving into a position with our Central Federal Lands Office. John is Paul Foundukas' supervisor, so we will be looking to fill that position. So that was just announced last week. In terms of the overall department, it's probably old news for the folks here, but we're, in terms of the Mid-America region, Paul Trombino has been nominated to be the new Federal Highway Administrator. He has gone through committee vetting at the Senate, and we're waiting to see when that vote will take place. Hopefully, well, the original hope had been before Thanksgiving. Hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have him on board. We do have Brandy Hendrickson, as I've mentioned before, from NDOT, so she's hit the ground running and is actually out in this area, not in Kansas, but out of Washington right now, visiting states. I did want to mention that our executive director, Butch Weidlich, will be in Kansas in April for the 100th anniversary of the Kansas Engineering Conference in Manhattan. So he'll be in Topeka. So folks are getting out here, and hopefully we'll have more coming to Wichita at some point. So in terms of other updates that I have, especially related to our working with KDOT and here in Kansas, the key item that we had approved back on August 1st was the Strategic Highway Safety Plan for the state. Since we've had that approval, and I think this is a bit of a piggyback on what Tom's talking about when we talk about safety and the importance of that in construction zones, and we're all seeing, increases in fatalities. One of the things that we have started at the executive level in Topeka, myself, Secretary Carlson, the regional administrator of NHTSA, we formed an executive committee to take the SHSP and come up with what could be some vital few items we could start to work on. Kansas Highway Patrol is part of our group as well, and motor carriers, but probably some of the themes we're going to be looking at are there some ways that we can help with funding towards increased enforcement, as well as public information. I know that KDOT has organized implementation teams based on that Strategic Highway Safety Plan. Bottom line is we're trying to get to a point where we can't directly impact the driver, but we're hopeful that we can create some programs to help dissuade some of the accidents that are happening and the fatalities that are being created. So that's one of the things that we're working on. This week, we are expecting to receive from KDOT their draft of the freight plan. We've had a couple revisions. I think our last issue is on freight bottlenecks, and I think we're pretty much done with that. But we're expecting to send in the draft plan to Washington this week, which is due. It has to be completed by December 4th so that we don't impact freight funding in terms of after in calendar year 2018, but we're pretty close. So that's a good development. Asset management plan that we're working on with KDOT. I know that they have brought on a consultant, and we're actively developing the draft for that, and we're well on our way to having that draft plan completed by April. Trying to think of what else I have here. I'm reluctant to give an update on the infrastructure, the Trump infrastructure package. We're kind of getting our news out with AASHTO. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about whether P3s will be a core part of that, or whether there will be some formula funding. And, we're getting our information as much from AASHTO as you all, so stay tuned. The infra grant solicitation closed on November 2nd. So I would anticipate by January, February, we'll be letting states and localities know those that had applied, where they selected and who will be receiving that award money. And that's what I have. So any questions for me?
Thanks, Rick. Any comments, questions for Rick? Appreciate you joining us. You're always welcome. You know that.
Thanks.
So, okay. Any other business, comments, announcements? Being none, we stand adjourned. Thank you.